All right, if you want to start us off, as soon as we have the YouTube feed live, Martine.
Just push go and there we go.
Okay, so we are live, so go ahead, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. I call the meeting to order, our August 1st, 2024 Public Safety Funding Committee meeting. We'll ask our director to conduct our roll call. Danny, please.
John Lewis,
Here.
Councilman Robinson,
Here.
Chief Butler, Chief Tobin,
Here.
Jason Brand,
Here.
Marissa Calderon,
Present.
Kimber Lanning, Dr. Noggle, and Barbara Broderick.
Here.
All right, Mr. Chairman, we do have a quorum.
Wonderful, thank you. As far as announcements, I know that Danny will have some in the director's report. Are there any other announcements any of our committee members need to make? We will move then to the agenda. Item number 1 on the agenda. Committee members, you may have noticed that we did receive one public comment. It was a comment that was not specifically related to the scope of our work, but it was still good to have and noted. And to the public, we continue to post how they can make comments for this committee to review. And outside of that, any additional comments any committee members would like to make related to the public comment section for our meeting.
And Mr. Chair, I just will note that we will go ahead and forward this comment from Cynthia to the appropriate departments, just in case they are able to respond.
Thank you. We appreciate that. Item number 2 on the agenda references our last 2 meetings of May 9th and May 23rd. There are minutes. Before we entertain a motion, are there any discussion items that need to be brought up related to the minutes of those 2 meetings? With no further discussion, I will entertain a motion, or we will entertain a motion.
I would so move.
Second.
Okay. Danny, were you able to note who made the motion in the second?
I did. I have Barbara and Jason.
Okay. With that motion and second to approve the minutes of those 2 meetings, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Agenda item number 3 is a presentation on the mental health unit from Commander Brandon Smith. Commander Smith, please.
Hello. PowerPoint's coming up here, I believe. Hello, I'm Captain Brandon Smith. I'm with the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. I've been here approximately 23 years, just short of by a month. I'm currently assigned as the commander over Inmate Medical Services Division, which encompasses the mental health unit, our medical infirmary, and our custody hospital unit. The mental health unit is located at the Lower Buckeye Jail. There's the Lower Buckeye Jail on one part, and then the side that you're looking at there with the 3250, the left half, encompasses the mental health unit. The mental health units run in partnership with Correctional Health Services. We have approximately 15 to 20 officers on duty each day, and Correctional Health Services has 2 mental health associates, 5 mental health license associates, 5 mental health professionals, and 1 lead psychologist assigned to the mental health unit, which helps oversee the operations. So the mission of MCSO and CHS is to maintain the security and welfare of the inmates or patients as they're coming in, to make sure they're not harming themselves, to make sure that They're getting treatment and reintegrating them not only back into the jail setting, but getting them stabilized to go back out into the public when they get released. So the mental health unit was built in 2005. We have approximately 256 beds. There's 210 cells. We do have some cells that have double bunks in them. They're modular style housing units, so they're not direct supervision. They have a central control tower, and then they have like a pod that we'll see in just a moment. We have 4 male housing units, 2 female housing units, and there's varying different observation levels of the inmate based on their medical status. If medical labels them as acute, that means that they're an active risk to themselves and or others, and they're going to be observed no more than every 15 minutes. Officers will do rounds, making sure that they're alive, they're breathing, checking for signs of life, making sure they're not harming themselves. Also, medical does 5-minute observations on them. They have a staff member that will walk around and just make sure that they're doing okay. And they also have somebody that has constant observation of them via camera system. So we're trying to make sure that they're not harming themselves or others, and that we're getting them the appropriate treatment as needed. As they're seen by the mental health professionals and medical staff, they can be stepped down to other housing units, and then they would be observed every 25 minutes, just as all other inmates would be. So our housing units, they're all labeled as like P for psychiatric. We have P1, 2, 3, 4, which are the male housing units. P1 and P3 are intake housing units. They're all single celled. When somebody at a jail facility or an intake identifies as a risk to themselves or others, they will be sent over by medical staff. They'll send them over with what we call a speed letter, which is just a letter transferring or admitting them to the mental health unit. So when they arrive, they will be escorted in by officers. Our officers will take over. We'll have medical and mental health come out and meet them. They'll triage them. They'll get their vitals. They'll make sure everything's okay with them medically. Then one of the mental health professionals will come out and do a suicide risk assessment with them and see what risk they are. And then they'll go back and talk with the providers and determine if they're going to be on active watch, potential watch, or if they might not be a danger to themselves or others, but they were better suited due to their mental health in a more controlled environment where they can get them stabilized on some medications. Then they can be put in one of the step-down housing units. So when the males come in, they'll likely go to P1 or 3. They'll be assessed, and then they'll be housed based off medical's determination. If they're going to be stepped down, and the step down is they're going from active or potential, medical still wants to observe them for a little while prior to sending them back out into the general inmate population. They'll go over there, they'll continue to receive visits, and I'll go over the visits in just one moment on the next slide. And then the females, all the incoming females, they will go to P5, where they will have the same assessments done. They will be housed there. And then P6 is our female step down unit, where they'll be stepped down once they're assessed that they're no longer active or potential. As you see here in the picture, this is what one of the pods look like. There's 3 cells across the front, and then there's 8 other cells along the side. They're all single celled. There's nothing for them to really stand on, jump off of. There's nowhere really to them to attach anything. They have a concrete bunk, and then they have a toilet with water facilities in there. In P3 and P1, they also have showers in their cells that they're able to use. Or we can take them out and put them in one of the pod. There's a shower in the pod too that they can use. It just depends on what medical determines their safety level as. Some of the housing units in P2, P4, and P6 have 2 bunks in there. So if they're trying to transition them and seeing how they're going to get along with other inmates before they put them back in general population, we'll be able to double bunk them with somebody else.
Hello?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes. All right. So mission protocol, or the admission protocol, like I said, they're going to be under continuous observation by staff until they're assessed by mental health and medical staff. Then once we get their determination from them, they'll assign them a level of care. So we have LOC 1, 2, or 3. LOC 1 is going to be seen daily by medical and mental health services for crisis intervention, stabilization, and intensive treatment. So anybody housed in P1 and P1, 3, and P5, they're going to all be LOC 1s for the most part. So medical is going to go out there and observe them daily. They're going to be on less than every 15-minute security walks. We do a non-predictable walk schedule. So we have randomizers that randomly tell us when to walk somewhere between 7 and 15 minutes. So depending on how that's going that day, those officers can be very busy with intakes or doing the random walk schedule. That's why we say no more than every 15 minutes. LOC 2, they're going to get a little bit more privileges. LOC 1s are typically going to have a suicide smock. It's a fabric, a tight fabric that goes over them, not tight around them, but it's a fabric that they're unable to tie or fashion anything to harm themselves with. And they're going to get a suicide blanket. They may have some boxers as well, depending on, or underwear, depending on what medical determines. And so those individuals might not have their orange shirt and their orange pants and socks. When you go to LOC 2, they're going to get their orange socks back, or they're going to get their orange shirt back and the orange pants back. They still may have a suicide smock for a blanket because we don't like to use sheets. The suicide blankets are a lot safer. They're called human safety blankets. So that's what we use in the mental health unit. LOC 3 or LOC 2s are going to be housed in the P2, P4, P6. Every once in a while, depending on room, they may still be in P1 and P5, but we try to move them out to get more freedom. We'll go over the treatment in a minute. We'll be able to see some of the more freedoms that they would get in the even number housing units. And LOC 3, they're only going to be seen twice a week for ongoing assessments and less intensive care by medical staff. We have very few of these. Most of the time, if they're going to be an LOC 3, they're stable enough to send out to the general population of the other facilities. However, like I said earlier, there are some individuals, just because of their mental health condition, they do need some more time. So we'll hold them for longer periods of time in P2, 4, and 6. So our average number of patients moved to MHU per month. As you see, during the COVID years, we were a little bit lower because our population was down. But 2022, 2023, we're averaging about 520 inmates per month coming to the mental health unit. That's about 6,000 inmates per year. And we're on track again this year for about 6,000, maybe a little bit over 6,000. And our makeup on that is approximately 22% female and the rest are male, which overall females are about 16% of our population. So the females coming to the mental health unit are coming in at a little bit higher rate than the males are. Then the average number of days that somebody's housed in the mental health unit is about 7 days. They're about just over 6.5 days last year. This year, they're about just under seven days. And in 2020, with COVID going along, we had a lot less movement. So they were held for a little bit longer during that time, but it's staying pretty stable. Once somebody comes over, the average is about 6 to 7 days that they're going to be here under mental health observation, officers doing security walks. Officers go under a little bit more de-escalation training, a little bit more mental health training to help them understand the mental health diagnoses that these individuals are coming in with and how to best deal with them. So some of the safety measures, that green thing on the table there, that is a suicide smock. When they come in, if they're an active risk to themselves, we don't want to give them a lot of things to harm themselves. So we'll give them a suicide smock. And then based off the provider's discretion, we may allow them to keep their undergarments. It just depends on how they're responding with mental health staff that day. Sometimes we'll have some inmates that like to bang their head, try to harm themselves that way, or they'll try to bite themselves. So we have what's known as a sparring helmet. It's a soft helmet, it has a face guard over it. That way, if they're banging their head or something like that, that kind of prevents them from being able to harm themselves, split their head open. We also have what we call safe beds that we can medical order. We'll put them on a safe bed where they'll be placed on the bed by staff and they're unable to harm themselves. They can be on there generally for up to 2 hours. And after 2 hours, they're let up and they stretch, and then they're reassessed by the mental health providers to determine whether they're going to be continued threat to themselves. And then the black thing on the corner of the table, those are mitts sometimes that we might have to put on somebody if they're trying to harm themselves. If they go to the hospital and they're trying to reopen a wound or something like that, or they're trying to bang their head and they're trying to take the helmet off because it's just a strap underneath. Sometimes we'll have to use those, but not very often. But the main goal is just to try to make everybody as safe as possible while they're in the mental health unit. While in the mental health unit, they offer programming in the LOC2 and LOC3 housing units. Those are normally the even numbered housing units, 2, 4, and 6. Correctional Health Services offers group therapy sessions, special need treatment plans tailored to the individuals for coping skills. One of the good things that CHS had brought forward, Correctional Services provider brought forward, was chalk, because sometimes they like to write on the walls or something like that. And one of the providers goes, "Hey, can we get the big sidewalk chalk and have them dry on the wall? It's better than other items that they were using." So we said, sure, let's give it a shot. And some of our inmates that have an affinity to draw on the wall, they started using that chalk, and it kept the housing units a lot cleaner, and it comes off the wall pretty easy, and it helps them cope with whatever they're going through. Correctional Services also coordinates with the SMI clinics, Public Fiduciary's office, and the Department for Developmental Disabilities for long-term care planning while they're in our custody and when they get out. So they try to transition them as they're leaving our custody to a clinic in the community where they'll be able to transfer and not miss any of their medications. The even number of housing units as well, 2, 4, and 6, they offer privileges such as commissary. They're able to order commissary. There's a tablet in this photo here in that rocking chair. There's the tablet sitting on the little black rectangle. That's one of the inmate tablets. We also have rocking chairs, which is very therapeutic. If somebody's in a mental health crisis, oftentimes they'll rock back and forth. We found that if we allow them to be in a rocking chair, that helps soothe them. So that's been a good addition. We're able to put those in their cells if medical recommends it. We're able to allow them to come out in the day room area and have them in it. Or if they wanted to go sit on in the rec yard, we're able to move those chairs around. They're heavy enough not to pick up and harm somebody, but easy enough to move. They're also able to get phone calls. There's music therapy where they'll be able to put music on to help soothe them. And like I said, there's outdoor recreation. In every housing unit, there's an outdoor rec yard. So we work hand in hand with correctional services. Every month there's a complex case meeting. So if we have somebody in custody that is just having a hard time getting through the process, we have we'll call them complex. So we will meet with correctional health, mental health leadership once a month, detention's involved, and we'll come up with a plan on how to best and safely treat them. One thing that came out of these meetings is we had an inmate that trying to kept harm himself. He liked to bang his head. They said, mental health said, hey, what about like a racquetball? So we talked it over to determine if there's going to be any security risk with this racquetball, and we said, let's give it a shot. Correctional services provided the racquetball, and it worked really well with this individual. Instead of when he got nervous, either hitting the wall or banging his head on the wall, he would throw the racquetball against the wall, which mimicked the same motions, but it allowed him to calm down and successfully diffuse his anxiety. Usually every day there's group huddles between the officers working the floor, the mental health staff, and the medical staff. They'll get together, go over what's on the day's plan at the beginning of each shift. They'll make sure that they need to see who they need to see for their assessments, who the providers need to talk to in order to do their assessments and see if they're able to leave the mental health unit. And then once a month, me and my command staff and the inmate medical services get together with the nursing directors and the mental health, or the medical directors and the mental health directors, and we just talk about any issues that we have, or how things are going between all of our staff, how they're working together, and just help make sure that we have that coordinated front together to go across and get the appropriate treatment to everybody. So like I said, it's a collaborative effort. We definitely have to work with correctional services. We need them in order to be able to see the inmates, get them discharged, make sure they're safe, and they need us to make sure that they're safe. We're getting the inmates to them in a timely manner, that they're able to do their assessments on the inmate. And we're just making sure that the inmate's health and safety is paramount. We don't want anybody to harm themselves either at any of our jails, but we want to make sure we get them stabilized, get them back out to the general population and or back into the general community, that they're more stable than when we receive them, and that they're getting ongoing care, have somewhere to go when they exit. Then I'm available for any questions if anybody has any questions.
Commander Smith, thank you. Didn't see any hands raised or hear a voice. So I think you covered the topic well.
Thank you.
Just to confirm, any questions or comments any committee members would like to make?
Mr. Chairman, just one clarification if I could.
Please.
On your patient counts on the third or fourth slide, are those unique patients, or is that just in through the door where you may have a repeat person or two here and there?
Those could be repeated. That's just the number of patients that have come to the mental health unit each year. So some of them could be repeaters. I wouldn't, maybe about a quarter of them. I would just be guessing, but just based on my knowledge and experience here the last 30 years, maybe about a quarter of those might be repeat individuals, but they do have a pretty good success rate of once they're here, they're on medication, get them stabilized, and then they get them back out into the jails.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
My question, this is Kimber Lanning, and I apologize if you covered this, but I didn't hear it. What percentage are, how shall I say, are addicted or are having a drug reaction that would indicate mental health that that actually once they come through that process do no longer have a mental health issue? Is there any separation, I guess, between those who are experiencing a drug-induced psychosis and those who have a permanent mental health issue?
I don't have the exact numbers, but I can tell you probably over half of those are over half of those are coming off some kind of drugs, street drugs, fentanyl. And then once they do come down from that, they do go out and they don't require as much intensive care. We do get a large number of our admits on a daily basis. We usually get about 20 to 30 admits on a daily basis. 15 to 16 of those do come from intake. So they're coming right off the street. They're just freshly arrested. They might be coming off drugs. So once they're able to get them off drugs on our Medicaid or on our drug withdrawal protocol and get them on MAT or medical assisted treatment, such as Suboxone or methadone or something like that, get them stabilized a little bit, we are able to get them back out and they don't have to really come back too much.
Okay, and I wonder if there's any evidence, a follow-on to that, is there any evidence that if someone has been on the street and on drugs, is their journey to recovery exponentially longer than those who maybe, have just stumbled on this in the last few weeks and they're having, maybe even came from a home where they're having a psychotic episode, as opposed to 6 months living on the street on a hard drug? Is it important for us to intervene? Is there data that backs that if we intervene earlier, they're quicker to recover?
I'm not sure on that. I might be able to get with our mental health director and see if we can get an answer to that, and then I can get it over to Danny, and she can share that back with you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, this is Chief Dawson. Could I add to that a little bit?
Yes, please.
Appreciate that. I wanted to also toss that out there, what Captain Smith was just saying, that, we meet quarterly with CHS leadership, all the chiefs do. And I've heard both Dr. Tracy Cruz, who's the chief of psychiatry, and Dr. Crutchfield, who's the medical director for CHS. I mean, they often speak of, co-occurring disorders, and a lot of that where it blends in from both the substance abuse and the mental health side. And we see a lot of that coming in the jails, and I think we do across the country. So if there are some specifics, I bet those professionals over there at CHS, if you had some specific questions to funnel through Danny, they would be able to speak to that, because they have brought that up many, many times. As far as MCSO, we don't have a lot of data or anything as to how that journey basically continues out into the community. A lot of that, then goes out into some of those partners and things that we have out there in the community. But I know that they would be able to speak to that a little better than we would. But it was a great question.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Commander Smith, thank you. We will move to agenda item number 4.
Sorry, Chairless, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just want to acknowledge for the minutes, Kimber Lanning, member of our committee, did join. So for the attendance, just want to make sure we noted that on the record.
Thank you. Kimber, thank you for your efforts on that. Item number 4, presentation. We'll turn to our consulting team, Monica Sanchez, on some initial findings and report progress update. Monica.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
For me right now, it's a little bit soft. And I don't know if we can turn up the volume or if you can.
Is that a little better?
That's the same for me. How about for others?
It's very low. I can hardly hear.
Okay.
Try one thing. Is that better?
Yes, it is.
Is this better?
That did
Yes,
it.
yes,
did.
that is too.
Better?
I
Yep.
think you did it, Monica.
Yes.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, and let me know if the volume is still not working optimally. So it's an honor to be here today and have the opportunity to provide you with a progress update. It was also very nice to have met you, Mr. Chairman, and other members of the committee a few days ago while we were touring the juvenile detention facility. With me here today are 3 of the 8 team members, Sam Yin, Eduardo Luna, and Stu Griffel. And we will be giving you a preview of the work that we're performing in 2 specific areas, along with some preliminary results. I can share with you that we have been quite busy in the last 6-7 weeks, and we're making good progress. We are evaluating a number of areas, which we will show you shortly in a slide. And we're just about, we're close to 50% completion is our estimation. We have conducted numerous meetings with the directors and fiscal personnel of the 4 main departments under this evaluation. As you know, is the Sheriff's Custody Bureau, Correctional Health Services, and the Juvenile and the Adult Probation Services departments. We have also met with other key stakeholders, including the budget office and departments that use the detention fund in a lesser scale, such as facilities management, emergency management, school superintendent, among others. We've also conducted on-site visits. We've had the opportunity to tour the Intake, Transfer, and Release Center. We have visited the Estrella and the walk-in jails, the Juvenile Detention Center, and we have performed a walkthrough of the different stages of the juvenile and the adult probation operations. At the forefront of all these meetings and interactions, of course, has been the goal to develop an understanding of all the services and programs that are paid for with detention funds, the results that these services and programs produce, and the cost associated to the provision of those services and programs. All of this with the purpose of bringing forth to this committee the information that you're going to need for making decisions regarding funding of the public safety and criminal justice system. I must point out the great support and collaboration that exists with all the departments. They have been amazing with collecting information and sometimes even reworking files for us and so forth. So tremendous assistance there, and we are very grateful for that. Today, we want to accomplish 2 things. We want to show you a high-level overview of the areas that we are evaluating, and then share some preliminary results in 2 of those areas. And number 2, we want to obtain your input to make sure that the scope of our work is spot on, and that the areas that we are evaluating are the areas that you are foreseeing. And to make sure that we're meeting your expectations in assisting you with making the decision in the future that you have to make. Next slide, please. So we have organized our evaluation in 3 large buckets, if you will. The first one is an evaluation of the services and programs that receive detention funds. We are, in that sense, building a profile of each of the services and programs that these 4, what we have been calling core departments receiving detention funds provide. Part of that, under that evaluation of services and programs bucket, we have 5 things. We are studying the mandates, the industry standards, and the best practices that enable these services and programs. For this, we are verifying that each service and program is linked to a mandate, an industry standard, or a best practice. The second thing we're doing is studying the allocation of detention fund. And we are also getting an understanding of other sources funding those services. Here's where we're taking a deep dive into understanding the use of detention funds and how they are utilized, and the extent of the use of detention funds by each of the services that these departments provide. The next area is, of course, the measures of success and the value that these services and programs provide to the inmates and the community, of course. In this area, we're compiling and analyzing all the existing performance measures associated to these services and programs, including output measures, outcome measures, efficiency measures in some cases, and cost effectiveness measures. That last one, we are in the process of calculating them or attempting to calculate them if they're not readily available at the departments. Under efficiency and effectiveness initiatives, we are aiming at documenting any changes made by the departments and their leadership to increase efficiency and better utilize resources and ultimately reduce costs. And the last area we're studying in this category is staffing and staffing constraints. Next slide, please. The next group, or the next bucket, if you will, is the evaluation of recidivism programming. So considering that recidivism is the one area that can mitigate the cost of incarceration, the cost associated to jail operations, we are conducting an analysis of the recidivism efforts carried out by the adult and juvenile probation departments, the methods that they use to track and calculate recidivism, the results that they have obtained, and we will try to compare the cost of recidivism programming compared to the funding. And the last bucket is the lookout. We will be evaluating the needs in the future, breaking down the expenditures by the various services and programs, and we will also document the sources of revenues that contribute to subsidize them. Of course, the detention fund and any other additional funding sources. We will identify and analyze significant increases and decreases over time. Right now, we are working on a 5-year look back. We're going to analyze those increases and decreases and the expenditures, the most significant cost drivers. We're going to attempt long-term forecasts, 15 or 20 years look out, funding necessary to address the population growth and also the new characteristics or the change characteristics of the population. We are going to look at public safety initiatives or external factors that will impact funding in the long term. Those include changes in administration or the administration of criminal justice, increase in substance abuse, increased population levels, staffing constraints, etc. And the last area that we're studying under this category is a survey of funding mechanisms, all with the idea of bringing forth to the committee funding options or mechanisms that are utilized in other counties and states. Next slide, please. Okay, we wanted to recap for you the magnitude of the detention funding. So in this slide, you can see that between the four departments, and for fiscal year 2023, the expenditure was $546 million, just over $500 million. And as we know, the Sheriff's Custody Services accounts for the majority of that. So this was, the purpose of this was to show and recap or remind the magnitude of the detention funding and show you some detail of that. You can see here that there is an other category, which is explained at the slide at the bottom. The table at the bottom. Next slide, please. Okay. So as I mentioned in the beginning, today we are going to give you a preview of the work performed and some preliminary results obtained in two of the areas mentioned before. The first one is the assessment of mandates, industry standards, or best practices for all the services and programs that are carried out by the four departments. Our methodology consisted of three basic steps. The first of which was to prepare an all-inclusive list of services and programs that are carried out by each of the four departments. Lots and lots of information. And this is where the departments were incredible with the collaboration that they provided. So this table is just meant to show you, to give you a feel for the magnitude of the work that was performed. The number of program areas here is probably different from what the departments would say there are, but this is the way we organized our work. So when we say, for example, 17, just one sec. Cannot see the slide. 17 program areas under juvenile probation. That was just our way to group the great number of services and programs that we documented. And that number, once we have the opportunity to discuss our results with the department, which is the last step in our methodology, we will be able to, I'm pretty sure, reduce that number to the number that accurately represents the way their services and programs are organized. Next slide, please. The second step in our methodology for assessing mandates, industry standards, and best practice was to classify these services and programs as mandated, meaning that they are backed by a state or federal or local law or court rule, from those services and programs that are supported by industry standard or best practice. The last step is, which we haven't taken yet, is to obtain management and validation of the work that we have performed. And in a few slides, Sam is going to illustrate this better for you. Next click, please. Thanks, Danny. So the aim of this slide is to attempt to illustrate the magnitude and the complexity of the legal frameworks that these departments are subject to. Starting with the US Constitution in the 8th and the 14th Amendment, for example, and other federal laws that creates the need for creating these incarceration systems, for example. Then we have the next layer of state law. In this case, very importantly, the Arizona Code of Judicial Administration and of course, the Arizona statutes that relate to detention services. That has a big role. Locally, at the county level, we have the cases that you're familiar with that have in fact, shaped the way corrections and correctional health operates today. All of that translates into each of these departments, policies, standard operating procedures, and all the manuals that they have in place in order to run their operations. So at the end of the day, those manuals reflect federal, state, and local law. Very complex environment. And then aside to that are the industry standards, which provide guidance, industry expert guidance on how to carry out some of these processes, more the specifics of how these things are done, how the different processes occur. Relevant industry standards are the National Correctional Health Care Standards and the American Corrections Association. Lots and lots of rules and regulations. So some preliminary observations in our assessment of mandates, best practices, and industry standards is that case judgments, all these famous battles that have taken place, really have shaped the way detentions and correctional health operate. And they have institutionalized all the mandates that came along with these judgments. Next slide, please. The second observation is that the services and programs currently provided, all of them are allowed by Arizona Revised Statute 426109, which is the jail facilities excise tax, maintenance of effort definitions, which outlines the allowable use of the funds. We have not come across any service and program that is not generally allowed by this state statute. Second preliminary, the next preliminary observation is that services are supported by appropriate mandates, industry standards, or best practices. Services also generally align with the minimum standards required by mandate, industry standards, or best practice. And the last observation is that emerging issues, in fact, will impact funding in the next 20 years. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to pass it on to my colleague Sam Yin to provide a couple of examples of how this analysis looks like. Again, it's just, we just selected a couple from the Juvenile Detentions Department. We thought that you could relate to that. We know that you were in that tour. So here is for you, Sam. Please take it away.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sam Yin. I'm a consultant for PSPA. I've got over 20 years of experience in law enforcement and detentions. In the next few slides, I'm going to talk about the services provided by Juvenile Department. These are part of the 17 services that we currently have identified. We're still reviewing them with Juvenile Probation Department and the leadership for accuracy. These are preliminaries, so our dialogue is still ongoing. The services provided by Juvenile Probation Department, as you can see, includes case screenings, pretrial preps, detention, medical services, mental health, substance abuse, and treatment services. In the next slides, I'll go over some of the data that we've gathered from the medical services side, specifically the comprehensive health assessment, sexual transmitted diseases screening, psychiatric consultation, and substance abuse education. Next slide, please. So the Arizona Code of Judicial Administration, often referred to as the ACJA, specifically the one that covers these mandates for this purpose, is a 6-311. It mandates that Juvenile Probation Department follows minimum standards outlined in the Arizona Juvenile Detention Operations Standards Directive. Those documents direct the care required upon taking any juvenile into temporary custody. So as you can see from the slide, this applies to the medical services provided by the Juvenile Probation Department. It is required that upon taking the custody of a juvenile, health screenings are to be conducted to diagnose both health problems and to begin treatment. That mandate for health screening also extends into the screening of communicable diseases as well, to include STDs. They're outlined in Section 2 of the Arizona Juvenile Detention Operations Standards, which covers all the health requirements. So as you can see, these are mandated services. They are currently funded by the detention fund, and it is an allowable use of those detention funds. Next slide, please. When we move into psychiatric consultations and substance use education, those are also mandated by ACJA and outlined in that operations standards. They are allowed to use the detention funds per state law, and they are currently funded. So part of our methodology is to verify that these services do conform to those mandates, and based on our recent on-site visit, we validated it, and these services are as described. I can share some numbers if you guys have questions later on, but from here, I'll let Stuart take it.
Thank you, Sam. Stuart had some sound difficulties, so Eduardo is going to take over this. But before Eduardo starts, this is the second area that we wanted to show some preliminary results and share the methodology with you. And this area is the survey of funding mechanisms. Go ahead, Eduardo.
Good afternoon, Chairman, members of the committees. I'm going to talk about the funding of detention services in jail facilities in Maricopa County. In addition, I'm also going to cover how other counties and neighboring states fund detention services. The next two slides I'm going to talk about first will include information on funding sources, not only available, but also being utilized by Maricopa County and other Arizona counties as well. And then the slide after that will cover a few examples of Arizona counties that are considering constructing new jail facilities. Next slide. Next slide, please. So the information on this slide looks a little bit familiar. You may have seen this information. This is information that we obtained from Craig Sullivan, the Executive Director of the County Supervisors Association of Arizona. And this was covered on a previous presentation to this committee on May 25th. We've taken the liberty of adding to the slide the names of the counties and the percentage sales tax rate were applicable, so that you can visually see which Arizona counties utilize statutory jail districts or a jail facility excise tax. 9 of the counties that are in light blue on the chart use a jail district funding mechanism and funds it through the form of a sales tax called the transaction privilege tax. The tax rate indicated to the 9 county in blue ranges from 0.25% to 0.50% based on the tax rate the voters approved. The only exception to this is Apache County, which has both a 10-cent property tax for the juvenile district and a 20-cent property tax for the jail district. Pinal, Gila, Greenlee, Pima, and Mojave and Gray use the general funds to provide funding for their jail detention services. Unlike Maricopa County, all of the other counties have the ability to levy up to 0.5% general fund sales tax to support county operations. However, Pima and Mojave do not utilize that authority. As you know, in 1997, Maricopa County went to the state legislature for a funding mechanism different from the jail district that would better meet Maricopa's jail service funding needs. As a result, a jail facility excise tax, which is also a transaction privilege tax, was approved by the state legislature for Maricopa at 0.2%. The next slide, please. As part of our work, we're also in the process of identifying funding mechanisms that Arizona counties have utilized for paying for the construction of new jails. Since new jail facilities cost millions of dollars, the number that have been built over the last few years have been limited. As you can imagine, the process of planning for a new jail can take many years and go through many steps, and often there is a citizen involvement in that process. The most recent jail facility we have identified is part of the new Justice Center built in Yavapai County. All the buildings included their detention facility were completed this year. Just for information, it took the county about 27 years from the time the need was identified to completion of all these buildings. The Criminal Justice Center cost approximately $65 million. Pima County has assembled a Blue Ribbon Commission to identify various options for funding a new jail facility. In the Commission's 2024 report to the county executive, the options presented were a general sales tax, a jail district's excise tax, general obligation bond, and pay-as-you-go, which is a program funded through primarily property tax. The PAYGO programs provides funding for general fund capital projects and initiatives. And then finally, Cochise County voters recently approved a 0.5% sales tax to address concerns about outdated detention facilities. At this time, the county is in the process of planning for the new facilities and hasn't taken any formal action on exactly how they will fund them. Next slide, please. So the second part of our surveying for funding mechanisms is we've kind of cast a wide net and are looking at 21 counties in 6 states to see how they're funding detention services. We're looking at counties located in the state of Texas, New Mexico, California, Washington, Nevada, and Utah. And we cast a wide net to try to really identify possible funding alternatives that could be considered for Maricopa County. Next slide, please. Currently, we're in the process of surveying 21 counties. It's been, to be honest, a little bit slow going. We are trying to obtain information, validate the information pertaining to specific funding mechanism metrics, including whether it's a jail district, specific excise tax rates, sales tax rates, property tax information, and also other metrics information such as the county population and the total number of jails. And finally, the next slide, please. So some of the preliminary results that we've been able to identify is that we've encountered, as in the states of California and Washington, really unique state laws that are really different. But just to start off with, for example, in surveying New Mexico, what we found is generally their counties are funding and supporting jail detention services using the general fund, and also relying on charging other jurisdictions or entities to house inmates. And also in that state, the state pays for probation services. In the state of California, most counties are funding detention services through the general fund, but also they have something called the 0.5% state sales tax dedicated specifically to local public safety services. This is in the state's constitution. Again, this dates back to the early 90s. And then finally, the state of Washington, which is really unique, they allow counties and cities to have, there's 5 specific justice-related sales tax and property tax that are used to fund detention services. In general, what we found there in our preliminary research is that any county can levy 0.10% sales tax for criminal purposes without voter approval. Revenue is also shared with the cities, and also any county can levy public safety sales tax of up to 0.3%, of which at least 0.10% must be used for criminal justice purposes. So the next slide, please. And this concludes our presentation today, and we'd be happy to answer.
Do committee members have questions, comments on the presentation?
I have one question. Back on slide 5, You break out how we're actually spending the money in the 4 departments. But there's a very large non-departmental, 88 million. And I'm just wondering if you could give me a little idea of what that actually is.
Monica, I think that was a slide that you presented. Do you recall?
Yes, that is the slide that shows the pie chart with the breakdown of the departments. Yes, there is this other category that, can we go back to this slide, please? That slide indicates, next, right there, thank you. That slide indicates that about 22% is recorded as under the other category. And as the table at the bottom shows, that other is made up of departments that utilize the detention fund. And then the very last line is an item called non-departmental. And non-departmental is a category that encompasses a number of things. And I have this information because we had the opportunity to inquire with the budget office, who has been a partner in this process as well. They explained that out of that, that 120, that 88 million, the 94% of that represents spending the county's contribution to the pension system, both for law enforcement and for detention officers, used to pay down unfunded liability. So that of that 88 million, 83 million approximately is pension debt payment.
And Monica, we have some folks from budget on it in case there's anything they wanted to add on that.
Fantastic.
Yeah, this is Kirsten Prindle. I can just kind of add to that. Overall, non-departmental is where the county houses all of our major revenue sources, contingencies, capital projects. And in this particular fiscal year 23, we had our pension pay down. So the county Board of Supervisors approved $500 million to help pay down our pretty significant unfunded liability in the law enforcement and corrections officers' retirement plan pension systems.
Thanks, Kirsten. Monica.
So to that point, for clarification, out of the 88.8 million in non-departmental, 83 million of that is PSPRS or Corp unfunded liability payments?
That is correct.
If you're going to show this pie chart again, why wouldn't you just separate that out? That's such a large, it's over 75% of that total number. Why wouldn't that have been broken out differently to just say pension liability? That would have made that pie chart make a lot more significance.
I think we can do that. The reason it's there is because we were focused on where the detention fund dollars were utilized. And that's how this table and graphic came together. But sure. I think that taking it out, accounting for that, because it's just.
Well, I didn't say take it out. I just say make it a different. I mean, it's 75% of the blue part of the pie, right? Or the purple part of that pie. So it's a pretty significant part of it. It's the highest part in there. Yeah. That
makes sense, sir.
I do think that in the report, there will be more detail on some of these. I think, and I appreciate a couple of members have brought this up, and I think it's important to note where that non-departmental goes. But I do think one important thing that we'll want to highlight is that there are these kind of big 4 departments, which shows here, and we just need to maybe add some more detail into that other category so it's more clear. So that's some really positive feedback. I appreciate the members who reached out on that. And I think there's a couple hands raised. Jason?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just to build on that, Kirsten, can you pull that out just a little bit more for me? So the pension pay down, is that maybe what you consider like a one-time or a couple years expenses, or is that building into a base going forward, if you happen to know offhand?
Yeah, it was a one-time expenditure. So we had accumulated some savings over the past couple of years, mostly in the detention fund. We had a significant number of vacancies. And then we had received some unprecedented sales tax growth, which is now slowed. And so we had some one-time funding available that we used to pay into the pension system, and we did it over 2 years. So we made a payment in fiscal year 23 and fiscal year 24. We have also just approved an additional $180 million in fiscal year 25 to hopefully completely eliminate our unfunded liability and the law enforcement officers plan, the corrections officers plan, and our county attorney investigators. And those are also the only plans where Maricopa County is the sole employer to be able to make those contributions as well. Mike, did you want to add anything?
I'll add a couple of things. Yeah, so regarding the graph, one other thought is that, if what you're looking for is something that's representative of ongoing costs, recurring costs, then maybe another idea is to carve out the one-time, as kind of like a side graphic, because, since those are just one-time spending and won't occur again going forward, I don't know if that's going to be a good representation of how detention funds are spent going forward. Another thing I wanted to point out was that since these are based on actual expenditures and not budgeted, that total number of 546 million is really much lower than it should be normally due to vacancies within the detention area. And Kirsten, if you want to clarify on that, I believe the vacancy rate there is close to 40%.
Yes, that's correct. For our detention officers, we have reached a 40% vacancy rate. So it's pretty significant savings that we've been experiencing in the detention fund as a result of that.
Yes, so normally that 546 million would be much higher if those vacancies were filled. And then of course our non-departmental or one-time, pension pay downs would be much, much lower. But we did use a lot of that one-time savings from vacancies to pay that down.
Thank you. Brian, please.
Yeah, just to go back to that, Mike and Kristen, so to understand it a little bit, the 546 million, there were some detention officer vacancies. Is that that's actual expenditure in 23? Because
yes, that's correct.
So then the overtime is included in the 546 for all of those people that were working, right? Extra to make up for correct. The 40% vacancy. Wow.
Yes, but it doesn't fully net out because their vacancies are so high. They really can't even use enough overtime that would, net those two numbers out.
Yeah, I can understand that. Yeah, that's a pretty high vacancy rate. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Other questions or comments, Jason?
Yeah, one more. It's on slide 18, I think it is, where you got the, 6 potential buckets of mechanisms. Can you describe to me a little bit about how you're defining this distinction between the excise tax and the sales tax categories?
So our sales tax is in the general fund. And the excise tax, the only excise tax we have. So we only get state shared sales tax. We don't levy our own sales tax other than the jail excise tax. So when we talk about detention, there's no state shared sales tax mixed in with any of the figures that are being presented.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks.
Any other questions or comments? To the consulting team, thank you. We'll hear more from you in the future.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Agenda item number 5. We have been on 3 tours as a group, and then 1 tour in a sense individually with our ride-alongs, and we haven't had a chance to share any feelings or thoughts. I know walking through some of the hallways and just some small interactions between many of you, there were a lot of comments, and some had to do with staffing, some had to do with the facilities, how old they were, or when they might need some maintenance. I think there was a lot of feelings of appreciation for the staff and their efforts, and in many cases where it might have appeared that there was understaffing and they were still with very positive attitudes doing all they could to help. But agenda item number 5 is to allow us to just share any feelings, thoughts, observations that will be helpful to us as we continue to look to making recommendations. And anyone can jump in, please.
Chairman, I'd like to give some feedback, comment.
Please, Marissa.
I was a little confused about the process in our first tour, the IRT building, where there was a backlog of processing the detainees. So, I know that, I don't know at what influence, or as we are discussing the budget where, the detainees have a right to be seen by the judge during a certain time frame. And that was a question of how, why do we only have a certain one judge or a certain time? And how did that come to be? And is that something that we need to bring up to our city councilmen? Do you guys remember we were talking about that?
Yes. Councilmember Robinson, I don't know if you remember that, or if you have a comment, or if there's someone else on.
And it's not necessary that this obviously this doesn't need to be solved right now. And I appreciate the time that I had specifically asked Danny. Like, we saw a lot of things, and we weren't allowed to really, we're not in committees, and I want to be very transparent. Like, I had some questions about some of the backings of what's going on, whether, if it's obviously it's not something that if it's not something that's related to the recommendation for this excess taxes committee, I understand. I just needed to understand, who do we ask? Who do we bring this up to? I felt like I was needing to advocate for the staff. Yeah. They're trying to do the best they can with those detainees. Okay, well, who do we need to talk to about that?
If I could, Mr. Chairman.
Please.
And Marissa, I think you and I may have had a conversation during that time, or at least had a few words, and I made the same observations and had the same concerns. And Phoenix, obviously being the largest law enforcement agency, you would think they probably contribute the most to that population down there. And the amount of time people were spending there was just as concerning to me. So ironically, upon coming back, I voiced those concerns with our city manager, Jeff Barton, told him I wanted to look into it a little bit further, or at least I was going to look into it a little bit further. The mayor and I had a conversation about it. And sometimes you have to be careful what you ask for, because in the last couple of weeks, she's asked me to chair our public safety and justice subcommittee. And just this morning, I spoke with our presiding court judge and explained that this was something I wanted to look into, because based on what I saw, we need to do something. Like Marissa was alluding to, there were a lot of folks, and there are a lot of folks of color who were there, and I'm not advocating we let everybody go by no stretch of the imagination, but them seeing a judge sooner than later, I think bodes well for the sheriff's office, for the local police agencies. It's just best all around, and for the individuals. It's my way of thinking. The longer they're there, the most likely it is that their whole lives will be turned upside down. They could get fired from a job. Any number of things could happen. So I am going to be exploring that on the City of Phoenix side, and have already made sure I'm getting the necessary players involved. Danny and I spoke earlier today, and so I'm going to be reaching back out to some folks over at the sheriff's office so I can get the right people at the table to discuss this a little bit further.
Thank you. I know, Brian, you had raised your hand first, but Michael, you raised part of this conversation. Maybe let me go to Michael in case you had some feedback on that comment.
Sure, I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate that, Mr. Councilman, as well. Just opening up those conversations. I just kind of wanted to go back to Ms. Calderon's initial comment, just to make sure everybody's, and I appreciate everybody kind of seeing where we're seeing some challenges and things at intake. But I just wanted to note that our working relationship with the City of Phoenix and Phoenix PD is incredible. And we know as far as MCSO that those defendants need to be before a judge within that 24-hour period. So even if there's some challenges, we definitely work with the City of Phoenix, with the courts, because that is paramount for us to make sure that we're meeting those defendants' rights. So, yeah, we definitely have some pain points, and as the committee sees those, we're also in discussion with the jail master plan folks, looking at some of those areas as far as the physical plant, where we could build some efficiencies in there. But I just wanted to make sure that everybody understands that I have an incredible working relationship with the City of Phoenix and Phoenix PD on that. And so, yeah, I appreciated everybody coming along on that tour and being able to kind of take a look at that. Thank you.
And Brian, did you have a comment on this subject or a different one?
Just to, not specifically to that, you just wanted feedback. So whenever you're ready for that, I'd be more than happy to share.
Let me just ask Brian, there was another hand in our conference room. Was that a comment related to the subject we've just had?
Yes, it is, Chairman. I don't want us to forget about when the police first arrive in terms of how people are brought in. That area space is not large enough. And I know I'm hoping that that's been addressed repeatedly in the master plan, but there's a safety issue and also a humane issue of moving people in the heat like we have into a safe area. So that one jumped out at me. The other at the ITR was also the clinical space seems to be small for what needs to be done for the nurses and along those lines. I think we got there on a pretty heavy day, and yet I was told that it's even worse at other times. So those two things jumped out at me, as did the City of Phoenix, in terms of possibly needing another judge. I know MCSO has a wonderful working relationship with the city, but I think that really did jump out to a variety of us in terms of how many people, they see them within the 24 hours, but it would just appear that if there was some way to move the parties, which Kevin, that's going to be the issue. It's not necessarily the judges, it's the other attorneys that are also involved, in terms of, but kudos, I really enjoyed that tour. But I want to make sure we kind of concentrate on that as people are coming in.
Thank you. And Brian, we will get to you. Let me just, related to the ITR discussion that we're having, any other committee comments? Okay, thank you. And Brian, let's go to you for some additional feedback.
Yeah, just some positive feedback with my tours that I had. I did the probation officer tour, and obviously last week we went out to the juvenile detention. I'll just say from the probation side of thing, I think the staff is amazing. People that are really dedicated to the work that they do for the community. I got to tell you, my heart was full with that, and then disturbed by the fact that it just seems so hard for people that are on probation that are being assisted with some halfway house things or the services that are provided. And then it's so hard for them to get back on their feet when they can't find housing and they can't find jobs that can pay for good housing. It just seems like a cyclical process. So I just wanted to make that note. And I really thought the folks at the juvenile detention facility were just, I just was amazed with the dedication of the staff of everywhere that we went. So I just wanted to say kudos to all of them. It was very impressive. I really appreciated it. It opened up my eyes a lot on these issues.
Thank you, Brian.
Mr. Chairman,
feedback, please.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, definitely kudos to all the staff across all the departments for putting together the really excellent presentations and the ride-alongs and all that. Really informative, and could tell that people were passionate about their jobs and dedicated to doing this. I think the observation I had across really all the departments was that I hadn't thought about prior to this was the sort of theory and practical application of the idea of treating the individual's issues and how that actually results in a better outcome for taxpayers by finding the right solutions for those individuals as they're going through the process from intake all the way to release back out into the general population. So I did appreciate that in a much stronger way than I had previously, that by doing a number of the programs that are within these departments, we can actually avoid people coming in and being more expensive to process in the long run for taxpayers. So I really appreciate getting that enlightenment on that.
Thank you. And back to our conference room, a hand is raised.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Chairman. I don't want to forget, Estrella Jail, the women's facility. It really is the oldest and really appeared to need some major work in terms of how the women are actually housed and moved. If you remember how crazy it was in terms of getting to CHS. So that facility is, I think, problematic and really needs to be addressed so that the women are treated a little bit more humanely. Staff is great with them, so don't misunderstand me. It's the infrastructure that I'm really being critical of. And then last but not least, I had the opportunity to tour the juvenile facility, as did most of you last week. And I'm just amazed at the care and the compassion that people have for youth and some pretty struggling youth in terms of mental health. And the fact, again, CHS seems not to have enough space for the kind of population that it has. And also juvenile probation and the detention side for the severe number of kids that they're actually working with. So those are my other observations. I did not go on ride-alongs because that's my former department. And I'm just very happy that you finally got an example of what really can happen when you work with people in the community.
In your Barb, in your juvenile detention center visit, we were treated to a singing group. Were you able to hear a singing group?
Yes. We did have a singing group and guitar,
Yes.
and it was just excellent. And I think what was really neat is we actually spent, hopefully you did too, with Dr. Benacara in terms of her clinical and the integrated health, because they're a little bit different than most other juvenile facilities. They really have the appropriate integrated healthcare going on. Again, their space is currently being renovated, but you know, I kind of walk away from all the facilities. We designed them. Unfortunately, they came with more difficult issues and needing for more CHS resolve.
Thank you. Additional comments or feedback? Well, to our leadership team for organizing the tours and the ride-alongs, thank you. And I echo many of the comments. It was a really good opportunity to see some things I hadn't seen before and to see firsthand some great team members in action. We move to agenda item number 6, our director's report. Danny?
Yes, thank you all. Just a quick report, and we'll actually kind of touch on the discussion you all just had in this as well. All right, so first off, thank you all. Here's some little photos from our tours. Thank you all for going. I think it was very educational, and I really appreciate the comments you all just made. And I do want to give some context because I think some of those comments are a really good start to one of the next steps that this committee is going to have to take, which is to look at what the recommendations are. So Paige and I are working on a presentation for hopefully our meeting at the end of this month to talk about the recommendations from the 97 committee. They made several for juvenile, and then they made 11 for adult. And they actually ended up only adopting 10 for adult. And so we'll go through some of those to give you a flavor of what the last committee looked at as far as recommendations. But I will say that a lot of the last discussion was in line with the type of recommendations they made in the last committee. And so I think this is a positive discussion that can maybe lead into some of those eventual recommendations out of this committee. And, you know, maybe we can solve one of them before the report's even out with the city of Phoenix with Councilman Robinson's work. So that would be great. So we will work on those, and that will be coming soon. As far as the report progress update, county leadership did get a preview of the jail master plan last week. So that was very positive. Again, to your last discussion, several of the things that were mentioned are part and a prominent part of the jail master plan, which I think is really positive. There's some stuff on ITR space, some stuff on clinical space. And so I think that will be a really important document for this committee to hear about. I believe that we will be ready for the August 29th meeting to hear from the consultants that have done the jail master plan. And we may need to go into an executive session because there is some stuff in there on, you know, utility lines and security that is not meant to be public for the types of facilities that are in the plan. But I have asked that we carve out a good portion of the report on the population estimates and the needs so that we can have a public portion as well so the public can hear about what's in the plan. And so we will be working on that to make sure that there's also the publicly available information, and then we'll have an e-session, I think, on the stuff that's not able to be shared in the public forum as far as security goes. Another couple of dominoes that kind of need to fall before we finish our committee plan, the juvenile facility assessment. So the consultant that is working on the jail master plan is also going to do a facility assessment of the juvenile facility. As far as timing goes, that may be completed after we finish our initial kind of recommendations, but be done before we make a final recommendation, just because they have to finish the jail master plan, then do the juvenile one. And we want to make sure that our consultants can wrap up their report in a timely manner too. And then our Public Sector Performance Associates report is the other domino. So all of this information will kind of come together, hopefully in one final report from this committee that we can take to the public. We'll go out to the public, talk about it, get some feedback, and then have an ultimate recommendation to go to the board, hopefully before the end of the year. So just to give you a little preview of what we're looking at for the future. As I did mention, I don't think the jail master plan will be done in time for our August 15th meeting because we have asked for kind of a separate portion for the public. So I think between the tweaks and then getting that, I think we just should plan for the 29th. And so I did want to throw it out there for the committee members. I don't have a lengthy agenda set for the 15th at this point. I'm happy to hold a meeting, but it might be a little lighter than today. And so I wanted to just check with you all if you'd rather still have a meeting, not, you know, lose the momentum, or if you want to take that week off and then reconvene on the 29th. And it's completely up to you guys, but I just wanted to throw it out there in case there's any thoughts or feedback.
Danny, just to interpret that, on the 15th, we have it on our calendars. If we do make progress in the jail master plan and you want to meet, should we keep it on our calendars right now and then have you give us an update as the date approaches, or is your feeling that we just wouldn't be ready and maybe we don't meet that day?
So since writing these slides, I think I have confirmed that it will be ready in time for the 29th, but not for the 15th.
Okay.
So, but I'm happy to hold it as a placeholder. If there's anything else we want to hear about, we can definitely have me on the 15th. I just don't have much content planned. So if there's not a desire from the committee to have that meeting, we can cancel that one, but I don't want to cancel it without checking in with you all first.
Sure. Let's get some feedback from other committee members. If we didn't meet on the 15th and focus more on the 29th. Does that work, or should we, or maybe there's some topics that you'd like to have covered that we could put on a smaller agenda on the 15th?
I'm fine for the 29th, Chairman.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if you're asking if there's no reason to meet on the 15th, I certainly don't want to.
Any other feedback?
29th works for me as well.
All right. Well, there was not a motion as part of that, but at the same time, I think I heard that we can tell Danny that right now we'll plan on not meeting on the 15th, and we'll be ready to meet on the 29th.
Great. And we will reach out to you in the interim. I think that me and Paige will have some conversations and reach out to you all. So you won't not hear from us the 29th, but we'll plan for the next in-person meeting to be on the 29th.
Okay.
Okay, so just wrapping that up, Paige and I have been working on procuring a consultant to help us with public outreach meetings. We want to make sure that they're accessible to the public, that we have translation services, that we have documentation that is useful and informative. And so we are in the process of getting a consultant that's going to help us that specializes in public outreach, since that isn't necessarily our specialty. And so we're excited about that. And I should have an update for you all in my next email update on that. Once the first initial report is done, we want to go out to the community and share it and get feedback. And so I think there will be some combination of meetings around the county and webinars and maybe some kind of surveys. And so we're working on that communications plan. And I do think that we'll have some updates before the 29th and maybe a small presentation on the actual outreach plan on the 29th as well. So I wanted to give you all a heads up. If you guys have any groups, I know some of you have mentioned them to me in passing, we've written those down, but if you have some groups that, you think we got to go talk to them, we got to get them information on this process, me and Paige are happy to go anywhere and talk to anyone. So please let us know. We are starting to talk to different groups about, what the committee's doing and trying to get some awareness out there before, we wrap this up so we can have a meaningful outreach process. And that concludes my director's report. Thank you.
Related to what Danny just shared, any questions, comments, or items to clarify?
Just a comment, Danny, this is Kimber. I am the co-chair of the Criminal Justice Reform Committee at Greater Phoenix Leadership, and I'd love to invite you in to give a presentation so I can follow up with you.
We are more than happy to do it, Kimber. And me and Paige have put a slide deck together with just kind of the background. So I'll share that with you as well, so you have that background information before we get it all set up.
Thank you, Kimber. If there are no further items or discussion, we'll plan on seeing the committee together again on August 29th. And until then, we'll do our best to stay cool, and maybe we'll get some monsoon rain. I'm not sure.
Looks like it's bypassing us.
But we will adjourn our meeting and wish you the best for the month of August, and we'll see you soon. Meeting adjourned. Thanks.